A man is coming to you. Funny how those words can sound like a warning or a promise, depending on how honest you've been with yourself. Open this now, they say, like urgency is the trick, like fear is the key. But urgency only works on people who've been sleeping. The ones who've been awake already feel it. Before the knock ever comes, urgency shows up loud, because people have learned to ignore whispers. It's not there to scare you, it's there to wake you up. Somewhere along the way, urgency got mistaken for danger. Like every fast heartbeat means something is wrong. But urgency isn't panic. Panic is chaos. Urgency is precision. It points, it highlights, it circles the exact moment you've been avoiding and says, look here. Most people run from urgency because it interrupts comfort. Comfort is slow, padded, forgiving. It lets days blur together without consequence. Urgency doesn't allow that. It snaps time into focus. It makes every second feel sharp, intentional, unavoidable. And instead of asking why now, people ask, how do I make this stop? That's the mistake. Urgency isn't an enemy. It's information. Think about how urgency appears. It doesn't come when you're distracted enough. It comes when you're almost ready. When something inside you is lined up just enough to handle truth. That's why it feels intense. That's why it feels personal. It's not random pressure. It's a signal that something has reached its moment. A decision. A change, a confrontation with reality you postpone too long. Urgency strips away the luxury of pretending. You can't delay forever. When time starts tapping its fingers, you can't overthink when the window is closing, and people hate that because overthinking feels productive without requiring courage. Urgency demands courage. It demands presence. It demands that you stop rehearsing and start responding. That's not a threat. That's clarity arriving uninvited. A threat wants you frozen. Urgency wants you moving. A threat clouds judgment. Urgency sharpens it. When urgency hits, the noise fades. You suddenly know what matters and what doesn't. The distractions lose their flavor. The excuses sound thin. The priorities reorder themselves without asking permission. That's not danger. That's alignment. The reason urgency feels uncomfortable is because it exposes delay. It shines a light on all the time you had and didn't use, on all the moments you sensed something needed to change and chose familiarity instead. Urgency doesn't judge that. It just reveals it. It says the waiting phase is over. The thinking phase is over. The hiding phase is over. People confuse urgency with loss. They think if they don't act now, something bad will happen. But urgency isn't always about avoiding loss. Sometimes it's about stepping into gain before fear talks you out of it. Sometimes it's opportunity knocking harder because it knows you don't answer gentle taps. Sometimes it's growth refusing to wait for permission. Urgency also exposes honesty. When time feels abundant, lies survive. You can tell yourself you'll start tomorrow, fix it later, become better someday. Urgency burns those lies clean. It asks one simple question: if not now, when? And if you don't have an answer, that's the answer. Not a threat, a diagnosis. There's a strange relief in urgency once you stop fighting it. The weight of indecision lifts. The constant background anxiety quiets down, because indecision is heavier than action. Waiting drains more energy than moving. Urgency gives you a direction, so you don't have to carry every possibility at once. It narrows the path, so you can finally walk. People who learn to read urgency stop panicking when it appears. They listen instead. They ask, what is being asked of me right now? Not what do I fear losing, but what am I being invited to become? Urgency doesn't demand perfection. It demands participation. Show up, choose, move, adjust later. Urgency also doesn't mean reckless speed. It means intentional timing. It means the moment has ripened. Acting too early is chaos, acting too late is regret. Urgency sits exactly between them, uncomfortable but precise. That discomfort is the price of relevance, of being present when it matters. When you ignore urgency, it doesn't disappear, it mutates. It turns into stress, resentment, self-doubt. It shows up as restlessness you can't explain, as frustration with people who have nothing to do with the real issue, because signals unanswered don't go quiet. They get louder in worse ways. Urgency is life tapping you on the shoulder instead of dragging you by the collar. It's the courtesy knock before the door gets kicked in, not a threat, a warning wrapped in opportunity, a moment asking for courage instead of comfort, awareness instead of avoidance, movement instead of excuses, asking you to finally respond while you still have the chance to choose how the story shifts. And who you become when you stop mistaking the signal for something meant to hurt you and start seeing it for what it really is, calling you into. Messengers don't show up when you're comfortable. They don't come while you're busy pretending everything is fine. They arrive at the exact moment avoidance collapses, when there's nowhere left to hide, when silence gets too loud to ignore. People think messages come randomly, but nothing important ever does. A messenger appears when you've exhausted your ability to look away. Avoidance is an art. People get good at it. They rename fear as patience, denial as faith, stagnation as stability. They tell themselves stories that sound reasonable enough to survive another day. And for a while, it works. Life lets you stall. Time lets you drift. But avoidance has an expiration date. Eventually it runs out of space, and that's when something arrives to interrupt the performance. Messengers aren't always people. Sometimes they're events. Sometimes they're losses. Sometimes they're moments that feel too specific to be coincidence. But when they come, they all do the same thing. They force you to look directly at what you refuse to face. That's why people panic when messengers arrive, not because of what's being delivered, but because of what can no longer be avoided. The mind fights this moment hard. It tries to minimize it, explain it away, delay engagement just a little longer. But messengers don't negotiate. They don't care about your timing or your readiness. They arrive when avoidance ends, not when courage begins. Courage is built after the arrival, not before. That's the cruel joke. People don't like admitting avoidance feels safe, because it preserves the illusion of control. As long as you don't open the message, you can pretend the outcome isn't real. As long as you don't answer the knock, you can imagine whoever's outside will eventually leave. But messengers aren't there to be convenient. They're there because something has reached its breaking point inside you, and the universe has decided. You've stalled long enough. People romanticize messengers like they're blessings wrapped in kindness, but real ones are uncomfortable. They disrupt routines. They expose contradictions. They ask questions you don't want to answer. They bring clarity that ruins old excuses. That's why avoidance collapses first. Because as long as avoidance exists, the message would be wasted. When avoidance ends, reality rushes in. All the thoughts you push down surface at once. All the decisions you postpone demand attention. The messenger doesn't add pressure. It reveals pressure that was already there. The weight you feel isn't new. You've been carrying it silently, pretending it didn't exist. Until now, there's a strange precision to timing. The messenger never comes at the beginning of denial. It comes at the end. When the lie has been repeated so many times it starts sounding hollow. When distraction stops working. When sleep doesn't reset you anymore. That's when something shows up and forces alignment. People ask why now. Like it's unfair. But now is the only moment avoidance no longer works. If it had arrived earlier, you would have ignored it. If it arrived later, the damage would have been worse. The timing feels brutal because it's accurate. Messengers don't care about comfort. They care about correction. Avoidance isolates you. It shrinks your world slowly, quietly. You stop exploring, you stop risking, you stop growing. And then the messenger appears, not to destroy you, but to break the isolation you built yourself into. To remind you that staying stuck is still a choice. And choices have consequences whether you acknowledge them or not. The arrival always feels personal because it is. It's tailored to the exact thing you've been avoiding. It hits the nerve you've been protecting. That's how you know it matters. Random noise doesn't sting. Truth does. Messengers don't shout. They stand there and wait, knowing that their presence alone is enough to dismantle the lie. Once avoidance ends, everything accelerates. Thoughts sharpen. Decisions become unavoidable. The future feels closer, heavier, more real. And that's terrifying for people who were surviving on delay. But for those willing to face it, there's also relief. Because pretending is exhausting. Running from yourself drains more energy than confronting reality ever will. Messengers aren't saviors. They don't fix anything for you. They hand you the responsibility you've been dodging. They expose the door you kept locked and force you to acknowledge that you're the one holding the key. What happens next isn't about the messenger at all. It's about whether you finally accept that avoidance has ended, that the moment you feared has arrived, that the message is here because you are no longer able to lie to yourself the way you used to. And now the only thing left is to decide what kind of person you are when there is nowhere left to hide. The truth is standing right in front of you, waiting for you to stop pretending you didn't hear the knock. Opening the message is never about curiosity. People like to pretend it is, but curiosity is safe. This is different. This is about accountability, stepping into the room and sitting down across from you without asking permission. The moment you open it, the story changes. Not because new information appears, but because denial loses its last hiding place. Accountability is uncomfortable because it removes distance. As long as something stays unopened, unanswered, unacknowledged, you can keep it abstract. You can talk around it, joke about it, postpone it. The unopened message lets you stay vague. The second you open it, vagueness dies. Everything becomes specific. Names, consequences, timelines. Responsibility. People fear accountability more than failure. Failure can be blamed on circumstances, bad luck, other people. Accountability points straight back at you. It asks what you did, what you didn't do, what you knew, and when you knew it. It doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't threaten. It just sits there, calm, patient. Impossible to argue with. Opening the message means admitting that your choices mattered, that your silence mattered, that your delays mattered, that your excuses weren't harmless. Accountability exposes how powerful you actually are, and that's what scares people. Because power means responsibility, and responsibility means you can no longer pretend you're just reacting to life. The mind fights this moment hard. It looks for loopholes. It wants partial accountability, selective honesty, controlled responsibility. It says, I'll open it later when I feel ready, when I'm stronger, when things calm down. But readiness doesn't come before accountability. It comes after. You don't prepare to face the truth. You face the truth and become prepared by surviving it. Opening the message also means surrendering control over the narrative you've been telling yourself. The story where you were misunderstood, unlucky, overlooked, mistreated. Accountability doesn't erase those things, but it reframes them. It asks how you responded, how you adapted, how you chose. And suddenly the story isn't about what happened to you. It's about who you became. Why it was happening. There's a strange clarity that hits when accountability arrives. The noise fades. The excuses stop sounding convincing. You see patterns you ignored, cycles you repeated, choices you justified. It's uncomfortable, but it's clean. Accountability cleans the fog out of the room. You may not like what you see, but at least you can see people who avoid accountability stay stuck in motion without progress. Always busy, always tired, always explaining. Opening the message interrupts that loop. It forces stillness. It demands honesty. And honesty is dangerous because it simplifies things. It removes complexity as a hiding place. It turns 1,000 explanations into one truth. Accountability doesn't care about your intentions. It measures outcome. You meant well, you tried your best, you had good reasons, all true and all irrelevant. Accountability asks what actually happened because of what you did or didn't do. That's why it feels harsh. Not because it's cruel, but because it's accurate. When you open the message, you accept that you are not a bystander in your own life. You are a participant, a contributor, a decision maker. Even your inaction was a decision. Even your silence was a statement. Accountability doesn't accuse. It records. It documents. It remembers what you wish you could forget. There's fear in this moment because accountability removes the comfort of blame. Once you see your role clearly, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to the version of yourself that believed nothing was in your control. That illusion dissolves the second you open the message, but there's power here too. Quiet power, the kind that doesn't need permission. Accountability gives you ownership. And ownership means you can change things, not instantly, not easily, but intentionally. You stop waiting for rescue. You stop hoping someone else will fix it. You realize the same hands that created the mess are capable of rebuilding something better. Opening the message doesn't solve the problem. It defines it, and definition is dangerous because once something is defined, it can be addressed. Avoidance thrives in blur. Accountability thrives in clarity. That's why this moment feels heavy, not because you're losing something, but because you're finally carrying what was always yours. The message was never about information. It was about positioning, about placing responsibility back where it belongs, about forcing a shift from reaction to ownership. Once you open it, you don't become perfect. You become honest. And honesty is the point where real change starts, where excuses run out of oxygen, where the story stops being about what you wish were true and starts being about what you are willing to do now, that you can no longer pretend you did. See it, and you didn't know, and it wasn't your responsibility because the message is open, and it's looking back at you. Asking what you're going to do with the truth. You finally decided to face encounters. Never introduce something new. They expose what's been quietly forming while no one was watching. People think silence is empty, like nothing is happening there, like time is being wasted. But silence is never idle. Silence is a workshop. It's where thoughts sharpen, where fears rehearse, where discipline either grows or rots. By the time an encounter arrives, the real work is already done. Silence prepares you whether you like it or not. Every unanswered question, every night spent staring at the ceiling, every moment where you felt overlooked or forgotten was shaping your internal posture. Were you paying attention, or were you numbing yourself to pass the time? Did you build patience? Or did you build resentment? Silence doesn't judge. It records people complain about being unseen, unheard, unnoticed. They think silence is punishment. But silence is training. It removes the distraction of applause and criticism alike. It forces you to listen to yourself without an audience. And that's uncomfortable because without noise, excuses get loud. You hear your own contradictions. You notice patterns you'd rather ignore. That's preparation, even when it feels like neglect. Then the encounter happens. A person, a moment, a message, and suddenly everything inside you reacts at once. Fear jumps forward or confidence stands its ground. Discipline takes control or chaos spills out. The encounter isn't creating that reaction. It's revealing it. It's holding up a mirror and saying, this is what silence turned you into. That's why encounters feel intense. They compress time. They make years of internal development visible in seconds. You don't rise to the occasion, you default to your preparation. And preparation isn't what you plan to do someday. It's what you practice daily in quiet. How you treated boredom, how you handled doubt. How you spoke to yourself when no one corrected you. People who avoided silence panic in encounters. They freeze, overreact, self-destruct, not because the encounter is too big, but because nothing inside them is structured to handle it. Silence could have built resilience, but they filled it with noise instead. Distraction, validation, constant movement. So when stillness ends and reality steps in, they have nothing solid to stand on. Others move differently. Calm under pressure, focused in chaos, grounded when things escalate. That doesn't come from talent or luck. That comes from silence endured properly, from sitting with discomfort long enough that it stops being scary, from thinking deeply without rushing to conclusion, from learning to exist without constant reassurance. Silence teaches restraint. It shows you how to pause before reacting, how to listen instead of interrupting, how to observe instead of assuming. Those skills don't look impressive until an encounter demands them. Then suddenly everyone notices. They call it presence. They call it confidence. They call it strength. But it was built when no one was clapping. Encounters also expose unresolved silence. All the things you avoided thinking about surface at once. Old wounds, insecurities, unfinished decisions. Silence stored them carefully, waiting for a moment where they couldn't be ignored anymore. The encounter is that moment. It presses on the exact places you left unattended. That's not cruelty. That's accuracy. People like to believe encounters change them. They don't. They reveal them. Who you are under pressure is who silence shaped. Who you become when challenged is who you practiced being when life was quiet. There's no shortcut around that. No performance can hide it for long. That's why some encounters feel like confirmation, like everything clicks, like the moment makes sense. Because silence prepared alignment. You wrestled with doubt already. You faced fear privately. You questioned yourself before the world did. So when the encounter arrives, you recognize it. You're not surprised. You're ready. Others feel exposed, embarrassed, overwhelmed. Because silence was wasted. Because time alone was filled with avoidance instead of preparation. And now the encounter feels unfair, sudden, too much. But it's not sudden. It's punctual. Silence is honest. It doesn't flatter. It doesn't rush you. It waits. It watches what you do when nothing is demanded of you. And whatever you repeatedly choose in that space becomes your reflex later. Discipline or distraction, growth or decay, courage or denial. Encounters are simply the reveal. The curtain lifting, the spotlight turning on. They don't ask who you want to be. They show who you already are. That's why they feel heavy. That's why they feel decisive. Because they aren't about the future. They're about the past catching up to you. So when an encounter arrives and everything suddenly feels serious, meaningful, unavoidable, remember, it didn't start there. It started in the silence you thought didn't matter, in the days you felt ignored, in the moments you believed nothing was happening. Silence was preparing something the whole time, shaping you quietly, patiently, honestly, waiting for the exact second it could no longer stay hidden, and the encounter could finally expose what you had really been becoming all along. Comfort is fragile. People treat it like armor, but it's really just padding, soft layers stacked between themselves and reality so nothing sharp can get through. Comfort is routines that never change, answers that never get questioned, relationships that never challenge you. It feels safe because it doesn't move, and that's exactly why it collapses the moment truth knocks. Truth never announces itself gently. It doesn't ask if now is a good time. It doesn't care if you're tired, busy, or finally feeling okay. Truth knocks when the door has been locked too long, when the air inside gets stale, when pretending starts costing more than admitting. And comfort hates that sound. Comfort wants silence. Truth brings vibration. The problem with comfort is that it trains you to confuse peace with avoidance. You start believing that if nothing feels wrong, nothing is wrong. You decorate your habits, justify your compromises, call numbness balance. Comfort rewards stillness even when growth is required. It whispers, stay here, don't risk it, don't look too closely. And for a while that whisper works, then truth shows up and comfort has no defense. Truth asks questions comfort can't answer. Why are you still here? Why did you stop trying? Why are you settling for less than what you know you're capable of? Comfort collapses because it was never built to withstand honesty. It was built to delay it. People panic when truth knocks because it threatens the version of life they carefully arranged, the routine that kept pain predictable, the story that explained disappointment without demanding change. Comfort doesn't want solutions, it wants continuity. Truth breaks continuity. It rearranges priorities. It exposes the cost of staying the same. When truth arrives, comfort reveals its weakness immediately. You feel restless, irritated, defensive. You want to scroll, distract, sleep, joke it away. That's comfort fighting for survival. Because truth doesn't just ask to be heard, it demands response. And response means movement. Movement means risk. Risk means the end of comfortable pretending. Truth doesn't need to be loud to be destructive to comfort. Sometimes it's just a sentence, a look, a realization that lands quietly and refuses to leave. You try to ignore it, but comfort has already cracked. Once truth is seen, comfort can't reveal the illusion. The mind keeps circling back. The quiet gets heavier. The routine feels hollow. Comfort collapses first internally. Before anything changes on the outside, something shifts inside you. What used to soothe you now irritates you. What used to feel fine now feels fake. You start noticing how much energy it takes to maintain appearances. That's truth working its way in. Dismantling comfort piece by piece. People blame truth for the discomfort like it's the problem. But truth didn't create the instability. It exposed it. Comfort was hiding decay. Truth just turned on the light. And light is violent to things that survive in the dark. That's why comfort frames truth as cruel, inconvenient, unnecessary. Anything to avoid accountability. Once comfort collapses, there's a moment of free fall. No cushion, no script, no familiar excuse to lean on. That's the moment people either rebuild honestly or rush to replace comfort with a new illusion. New routines, new distractions, new stories that feel safer than facing the rawness of change. Truth doesn't rush you, but it doesn't leave either. It waits in the doorway, patient, watching what you do once comfort is gone, whether you fortify yourself with discipline or retreat back into denial, whether you accept the discomfort as growth or treat it like a wound to be covered up. Comfort teaches you how to stay the same. Truth teaches you how to move. Comfort says survive. Truth says become. That's why they can't coexist. The moment truth knocks, comfort's expiration date is triggered. You can ignore the knock, but you can't pretend you didn't hear it. People who cling to comfort after truth arrives become bitter. They resent change. They resent messengers. They resent reminders. Because everything becomes a threat to the fragile setup they're trying to preserve. But people who accept the collapse of comfort gain something dangerous. Clarity. And clarity doesn't negotiate with fear when comfort collapses. Excuses sound childish. Delays feel expensive. You realize how much time was traded for convenience. That awareness hurts, not because truth is cruel, but because honesty shows you what you could have. In building instead of maintaining truth, knocking is not an attack. It's an invitation disguised as disruption, an offer to trade comfort for alignment, to trade padding for strength, to trade quiet stagnation for loud growth. Comfort collapses because it was never meant to last. It was meant to get you through, not keep you there. And once truth arrives, staying comfortable becomes impossible because you now know too much to keep lying to yourself, and that knowledge sits with you, heavy and awake, long after the knock fades and the door is still standing there waiting for you to decide whether you're going to rebuild on something real or keep propping up what already fell apart.